Today at 1, pressure on America to keep troops in Afghanistan longer so more people can escape the Taliban. US and British forces have airlifted thousands out. Now there's growing evidence of Taliban crimes.
We have also received credible reports of serious violation of international humanitarian law and human rights abuses.
The stories of some of those who've escaped, evacuated to safety.
When I was in the streets, I could see that people were running and they were so afraid. They were told me that go home, Taliban is coming.
A virtual summit of G7 leaders to discuss Afghanistan gets underway shortly, also this lunchtime. The NSPCC says online grooming crimes in England and Wales have reached a record high. A BBC investigation shows disabled and older adults in England face steep rises in council care costs. And the Paralympics get underway in Tokyo, but once again, COVID will keep the fans away.
In Wales today, a call for more protection for retail staff after abuse from customers in the pandemic. And living with long COVID, patients in North Wales work with the Health Board to access a range of treatments.
Good afternoon and welcome to the BBC News at 1. Over the next few hours, leaders from the G7 countries are to hold an emergency virtual meeting to discuss the conflict in Afghanistan. Boris Johnson, along with France and Germany, is expected to press President Biden to extend his deadline of the end of this month to complete the withdrawal of US forces from the country so that more people can be evacuated. But the Taliban is warning there'll be consequences if troops don't leave on schedule. It comes as the UN says there are harrowing and credible reports of human rights violations taking place in the country. Our diplomatic correspondent Paul Adams has the very latest.
British and American troops working together amid the heat and chaos of Kabul airport. This vast multinational effort entirely dependent on American involvement. Without it, everyone goes home. Britain wants more time.
I think at the moment it is unlikely. I see the statements, the public statements from President Biden. I've seen the statements from the Taliban, but we have to plan on the 31st of August being the last moment. Every day we get after that would be a big bonus.
Britain now says it's evacuated 8,500 people in the past 11 days, more than 5,000 of them Afghans. The process more organised than before, but it all takes time. Among those still hoping to leave, plenty of fear, but also a lot of doubt.
Well, there is a difference between the Taliban now and the Taliban 20 years ago, because the Taliban leadership now seem to be aware, conscious, but nobody knows when the mood may change and they may become the same as they have been in the past.
There is no difference between the Taliban right now and the Taliban 20 years ago. Those in power 20 years ago killed people, and I don't know when they'll start again. We are leaving until the situation clears.
The Taliban say they want foreign troops out in 7 days. They're busy cementing their control over the country. The UN says it has credible reports of serious human rights violations.
They include, among others, summary executions of civilians and all the combat members of the Afghan National Security Forces. Restrictions on the right of women, including the right to move around freely and girls' right to attend school. Recruitment of child soldiers and repression of peaceful protests and expression of dissent. Many people now fear reprisals by the Taliban against those working with the government or the international community.
But there are other equally pressing issues. Kabul is flooded with homeless, desperate people, not clamouring to leave, just trying to stay alive, in a country chronically dependent on international aid.
These are people who have been uprooted, who are staying out in the open or staying in camps, who've left the safety and security of their homes. These are people who are searching for water, whose harvests have failed, who have seen atrocities that nobody should ever see, and are now living in a country where they don't know what is going to happen next. There's a high degree of fear. What these people need is the support of the international community.
Afghanistan is in the middle of a drought, a pandemic and until recently, a war. Millions are going hungry. The parched soil cannot sustain them. As the world races to get people out, a country ravaged by 4 decades of conflict is facing even more hardship. Paul Adams, BBC News.
Secunda Kamani is live in Kabul for us this afternoon. Is there any let-up, Secunda, in that dire situation that we've all been seeing at the airport in the last couple of days?
Well, Clive, the situation seems somewhat less chaotic than it has been in previous days, but that's only really because it's been so horrific up until now. There are still thousands of people camped outside the airport. That includes whole families with young children as well as elderly parents. There's still Taliban forces, Afghan forces, and at times as well American and British forces firing into the air to control the crowd. At one entrance to one of the gates to the airport, controlled by British forces, Taliban fighters are there, and they're filtering the crowd into different channels. Now, the aim of it is meant to be to sort out those people who have paperwork from those people who don't have paperwork. That's brought a little bit of order, but of course it must be deeply distressing for those people who are being evacuated because they have links, let's not forget, to international troops or foreign embassies here, and so they're worried about their future under the Taliban. Elsewhere in Kabul, there's a sense of uneasy calm that continues. Banks remain closed. That's a major problem for people here. More and more shops and restaurants are opening up, though there's still far fewer people out and about. In other parts of the country, we're told that some schools have been opening up too. That includes girls' schools in some areas, though we're also told that in others, the Taliban are preventing girls from over the age of 12 from attending.
OK, Secunda, thank you for that. Secunda Kamani live in Kabul. Well, here, the British government wants more time for emergency airlifts, but says UK troops will have to leave Afghanistan whenever US forces return home. So what can be achieved when the leaders of the G7, the world's wealthiest nations, hold discussions today? Our political correspondent, Demi Grammaticus, has more.
The leaders of the world's richest nations. Since their last meeting 2 months ago, the state they hope to build in Afghanistan has crumbled. Boris Johnson's task today is to marshal them to find a new strategy for the reality of the Taliban in power. The temporary toehold at Kabul airport is the last vestige of Western influence. If the US does not extend the airlift, the UK hope is the G7 can at least try to deter the Taliban from seeking revenge on those who it fails to evacuate.
I think one of the messages from the G7 will be to the Taliban, which is to not hinder all those people trying to leave the country and recognise that that their human rights should be protected, and we will not allow them to be persecuted and murdered, and that they should be given free access. Now that is a strong statement from the G7 if it does come out.
The UK and the US are already talking about what happens when the airlift has to end, resettling Afghans if they can flee to neighbouring countries. The government's own MPs and the opposition believe there are ways to influence the Taliban which must be used as lives are at stake.
This is a very different, more complex country than when they were last in power. The population is twice the size. The banking system and the economy is about to collapse. Those who kept the country going, running the water, the food supplies, businesses, transport, running the airport, have largely departed. The Taliban will need international agency support to avoid a massive humanitarian crisis, famine and starvation.
The Taliban will be looking to the UK for support. They'll be looking to other countries for support. They'll be looking to us, for example, for access to airspace. So there are levers that these very powerful countries can exert even at this 11th hour. And that's what the Prime Minister has to get world leaders to agree a common approach on today, or the implications for people are going to be appalling.
The question for Boris Johnson and Western allies is how much to engage with the Taliban. For now, they say new sanctions are not on the table. The priority is saving lives. Amy Grammaticus, BBC News, Westminster.
Well, our North America correspondent Ali Maqbool is in Washington. Ali, President Biden is coming under intense pressure to delay the US troop withdrawal, but just how determined is he to stick to the current schedule?
He's left himself a little bit of wiggle room, although he has been saying that he hopes that this will all happen, that all of the people who need to be extracted from Kabul, that will happen by the end of the month. But military planners are disagreeing with him. He's feeling the pressure, not just from those allies in the G7, as we've heard, but a lot of critics from home, even from the Pentagon, because although we've heard from the White House that an extraordinary number of people have been evacuated from Kabul in the last 24 hours by the US military, 21,600 people in the last 24 hours. Military planners here are saying even at that rate, it will take until mid-September to get out all the foreign nationals and all of those Afghans who've worked with coalition partners over recent years in Afghanistan. And the Pentagon is saying we need a decision as soon as possible to say when the final deadline will be, because we need to get the 5,800 US troops who are there out as well. But the criticism has mainly been about this arbitrary date. That is what Joe Biden has been in trouble for in terms of this entire withdrawal, setting a withdrawal date of the 11th of September for troops to come out. And now he's coming under criticism for an arbitrary date and not having a deadline set as to when goals have been achieved, but instead just having a date deadline.
OK, Aleem, thank you for that. Aleem Maqbool there, live in Washington. Well, the Ministry of Defence says it's airlifted 8,458 people out of Afghanistan to the UK since mid-August. And these are the stories of 3 people trying to make their way to Britain, beginning with one woman who's in quarantine, having just landed in the UK and has been speaking to her family about the Taliban takeover.
Seeing them face to face, it was something like, I can't describe it at all. It has been really, really tough. Even because everywhere you go, you see them with a gun, and they're really, really rude. There's no respect for women. Much relief to see my siblings here, really happy. Oh, we're home back. We're gonna see Dad, and I'm gonna give this. So they're really happy. Seeing them happy, Mom happy. It's just everything for me, and I'm just waiting to see Mr. Dad and my brothers.
Last night I was speaking to a guy who used to work with me over 10 years ago as an interpreter, and he told me that he was going to risk a drive at night with his wife and his 5 children. And I've only got 2 kids, and I can tell you traveling with kids isn't easy. But to try it at night in a war zone on potholed roads, I mean, you wouldn't do that unless you were desperate. And he's doing it because he's looking for a way out. And you'll understand, I spent a bit of a sleepless night this evening, or rather since last night. And I'm very glad that he's checked in this morning. I'm also very glad that through the night, Foreign Office and Home Office staff have been working absolutely flat out and have secured him, quite rightly, the permission to come to the UK.
Just the night before the Taliban took over Kabul, we were with friends in cafes. I went to shopping, and life was normal, totally normal. And also in the morning of Sunday, like in Sunday morning, President Ghani published a video and tell the people of Afghanistan that everything will be okay, so don't worry. But I was on my way to a PCR test because I had a flight on Monday to Turkey. And then when I was in the streets, I could see that people were running and they were so afraid. They were told me that go home, Taliban is coming. And just 5 or 6 hours after the video that President Ashraf Ghani published, we saw that Taliban took over even presidential palace.
The stories there of some of the people having escaped Afghanistan or currently trying to flee the country. Now, the number of online grooming crimes recorded by police in England and Wales has jumped to an all-time high. There were nearly 5,500 cases in the year to March. Figures obtained by the children's charity, the NSPCC, show that Instagram, which is owned by Facebook, was the platform most commonly used by suspected paedophiles. Here's Daniela Ralph.
Hi everyone. So I've decided to talk about the abuse that's happening online.
Campaigning to keep children safe. For the NSPCC, getting the message out about dangers online is increasingly important. The figures are stark. In 3 years, there's been a 69% rise in the number of cases of online grooming. For one young woman, deceitful messages escalated to sexual abuse.
As the grooming went on, he would tell me he was slightly older, and then he was slightly older than that. But by that point, I trusted him that much that it didn't matter, it didn't register. It went on for quite some time. We met in person. He sexually assaulted me and then went on to rape me twice. I didn't realise that that's what it was at the time. I thought that he loved me and that's what you do. It wasn't until I was probably about 16 or 17 that it really hit home about what had happened.
The figures show Instagram and Snapchat were used the most often for sexual grooming. Agencies trying to protect children fear new safety legislation that is imminent just won't be enough.
Groomers will look to contact children on large sites like Facebook or Instagram, but then migrate them across to a live streaming platform or perhaps to an encrypted messaging platform. And one of the key areas where the legislation is falling short is only asking platforms to address the risks on their own sites rather than working together to identify the emerging threats, to share intelligence, to share best practice.
Online grooming was found on all the main platforms. In a statement, a Facebook spokesperson said, "This is abhorrent behaviour and we work quickly to find it, remove it and report it to the relevant authorities. We also block adults from messaging under 18s they're not connected with and have introduced technology that makes it harder for potentially suspicious accounts to find young people." Tech companies say they are designing algorithms to remove harmful material. But today's figures show they are fighting a rising tide of online sexual grooming. Daniela Ralph, BBC News.
In the past hour, it's been confirmed that Scotland will launch its own public inquiry by the end of the year into the handling of the COVID pandemic. The First Minister, Nicola Sturgeon, says it will be led by a judge and will scrutinise all devolved decisions relating to COVID, including what happened in care homes. Our Scotland correspondent, Lorna Gordon, is in Glasgow for us now. Lorna, was this expected?
Yes, it was, Clive. You know, a couple of interesting things came out of today's briefing. The first one was about this judge-led inquiry, which will be established by the end of the year. Almost 10,500 people have died here in Scotland, where their deaths mentioned COVID-19 on their death certificate. That's happened since the beginning of the pandemic. Nicola Sturgeon says they want to scrutinise all aspects of how the pandemic was handled, at least all aspects that are down to the devolved administration. 4 areas in particular: the direct health impacts of COVID-19, including cases and deaths in care homes, what the government here calls other non-COVID health impacts, impacts in areas like education and economic impacts as well. Well, a prominent solicitor here in Scotland who's acting on behalf of members of what's known as the COVID-19 Bereaved Families for Justice group has welcomed the announcement this morning, but he said that the public inquiry must be truly independent and leave no stone unturned. Amar Anwar also said that grieving families must be at the heart of the inquiry process if it's to be effective and meaningful. So Nicola Sturgeon talked about that inquiry, some of the details of that inquiry, but she also talked about the figures of the COVID figures going up here in Scotland, and she warned that if the surge continued, she could not completely rule out having to impose some restrictions in the future.
Okay. Lorna, thank you. Lorna Gordon there in Glasgow. McDonald's says it's run out of milkshakes because of supply problems caused by a shortage of drivers. The company has also been left without bottled drinks across more than 1,000 outlets in England, Scotland and Wales. Our business correspondent, Coletta Smith, is at a McDonald's in Stretford in Manchester. Coletta, just how bad is it there?
Well, this is an issue that's affecting, as you say, 1,250 stores, so every store in England, Scotland and Wales. They've run out of milkshakes, they've run out of bottled drink. We haven't had customers here complaining too much, but it is an issue that's being caused, McDonald's say, because of supply chain problems. They won't go into more detail than that, but it's a refrain that's becoming very familiar now across the food industry. Last week, it was Nando's saying that they've run out of supplies of fresh chicken. That caused the closure of 50 stores for a couple of days. Now it's McDonald's turn. Behind all of that is because of is the issues with HGV drivers and the shortages across the logistics sector. That's really come to a head because of Brexit, because of COVID, because of delays in tests for HGV drivers, all coming to a head at the same moment. McDonald's, of course, famous for the Big Mac and fries, but they're actually one of the largest drinks retailers in the UK, so more supply chain problems for them will have a big knock-on impact on the business as a whole.
OK, Coletta, thank you. Coletta Smith there in Stretford in Manchester. It is 20 minutes past 1, our top story this lunchtime. There's growing pressure on America to keep troops in Afghanistan longer so more people can escape the Taliban. There's also growing evidence of emerging Taliban crimes.
We have also received credible reports of serious violation of international humanitarian law and human rights abuses.
Coming up in Wales today, a call for more protection for retail staff after abuse from customers in the pandemic. And living with long COVID patients in North Wales work with the Health Board to get access to a range of treatments.
The Tokyo Paralympics is getting underway with the opening ceremony taking place under strict COVID rules. Nearly 4,500 athletes from 162 countries will be competing, with Paralympics GB hoping to beat their total of 147 medals from Rio 5 years ago. Our sports correspondent Andy Swiss has more details.
364 days after it was meant to start, the waiting was finally over. Despite the delay, despite the pandemic, at last the Paralympics had come to Tokyo. The title for the opening ceremony is We Have Wings. It's set in an imaginary airport. Organisers said they wanted to highlight the power of Paralympians. And after that early spectacle, there was soon another, a fireworks display lighting up the night sky. But for Japan, simply staging these games at a time of record COVID rates has been a huge challenge. And after the entrance of their flag, their national anthem echoed around the stadium. And soon it was time for the athletes.
Would all passengers please prepare for their much anticipated arrival?
162 teams are here in Tokyo, but the early focus was on one that isn't.
To shine, and they've worked for 5 years.
Afghanistan's flag carried by a volunteer as a message of solidarity after its two competitors were unable to travel.
And here they come.
As for Britain, well, their flag bearers were two of their most experienced campaigners, swimmer Ellie Simmons and archer John Stubbs. A more muted opening ceremony than normal, but for the athletes who feared these games might never happen, their big moment is finally here.
Yeah, finally here, Andy. The opening ceremony, it is going on as we speak, but the fans still not allowed in.
That's right, Clive, yes. The athletes' parade should be drawing to a close in the next half hour or so. Then, of course, the Paralympic cauldron will be lit and the Games will be officially underway. But it is a Games happening in unprecedented circumstances. There is still a state of emergency across Tokyo. In fact, only last week, COVID cases here in Japan hit a new high. But the Paralympic organisers insist that the Games can be staged safely and that they won't spread the virus. Despite that, though, in fact, today the organisers said there would actually be a few spectators. They revealed that 100,000 school children will be able to attend the Games at their local venue. So that should create something of an atmosphere. As for Paralympics GB, well, they go into these Games really with high hopes. They've blossomed at recent Games. In Rio 5 years ago, they won some 147 medals, finishing second in the medals table. A lot of their big names are back here in Tokyo, names that people will remember really from London 2012, the likes of Johnny Peacock, Hannah Cockcroft, David Weir, but especially keep an eye out for cyclist Dame Sarah Storey, because she could become the most decorated Paralympian in British history. She already has some 14 gold medals. Her first event is tomorrow, and she'll be hoping to get Paralympics GB off to a winning start, Clive.
Indeed. OK, Andy, thanks for that. Andy Swiss there live in Tokyo. The elderly and adults living with disabilities in England are facing a steep rise in the amount of money they have to pay local councils towards their care. New research from the BBC shows the extra costs could total thousands of pounds every year for some individuals. The councils blame funding cuts, but the government says it's put extra money into the care system. Here's our social affairs correspondent, Alison Holt.
These are the things that make a huge difference to Saskia's life, her football and her own flat. She has a learning disability, and to live independently she relies on help from her local council.
I get support workers coming to support me and cook. If it wasn't for them coming in, I would have struggled big time.
Her mum looks after her finances.
This was my appeal against the increased charges.
She was horrified when the amount Saskia was expected to contribute to her care from her benefits suddenly increased from £92 a month to more than £500 a month.
It will mean that her life is far from fulfilled or enriched. It will mean that she has to make difficult choices, or I have to make difficult choices for her, that she can't take a train to where she plays football with her team.
When Mum told me, she just burst out into tears, and I was like, I hate seeing my mum cry.
The family also says £1,500 was taken from Saskia's account without warning to cover backdated charges.
Without my intervention, she wouldn't have had any food that week. She wouldn't have been able to pay her gas, electricity or water bills.
The BBC asked councils in England about increases in care charges. 83 responded. In the last 2 years, they've increased the money they collect from people needing care by £51 million, the equivalent of a 13% rise in costs for each person getting support. And 6 councils have doubled the money they raise from community-based learning disability services.
This is another sign that social care is in crisis and it needs more money, it needs proper reform. This is simply wrong, that people who are the least well off in society are being expected to make up the shortfall when this money should come from government.
Directors of council care services say after years of austerity, their finances are so tight they face really tough decisions.
It's not what local authorities would choose to do, but increasingly we're just running out of options. We need to stay solvent, we want to continue to be able to provide services, and levelling charges is just one way of doing that.
The government says it's put extra money into supporting people like Saskia and will publish plans for reform soon. Alison Holt, BBC News.
Campaigners are warning of the dangers of outdoor swimming and offering free classes to help children enjoy the sea safely. One woman who helped rescue a 7-year-old boy who got into difficulties in the water near Bournemouth has been telling her story in the hope it will prevent a tragic accident. Here's Sarah Farmer.
Nicola Dorrington was on a family trip to Alamchine Beach. The sun was shining, the sea was calm. But something in the water wasn't right. A young boy was lying in the shallows, unnoticed by the beachgoers around him.
It could be like a shadow, or it could be a toy or some seaweed. And then I looked again and I saw a hand underneath, and I just felt like I had to go and see what it was.
Nicola pulled the boy from the water and screamed for help from the nearby lifeguards.
He was unconscious, he was floppy, he had the foam coming out of his mouth, as I said, so I just expected the worst. It almost felt like time had stood still. In my head it took ages for someone to get him, but it was seconds when someone grabbed him, but yeah, it felt like a lifetime.
The boy was treated and returned to his family. It's situations like this that the Swim Safe scheme hopes to avoid. Swim England and the RNLI are offering free water skills sessions to young people.
Every year around the UK we see around 250 accidental drownings. The vast majority of those people don't intend to be in the water, and it's really easy to get in trouble unexpectedly. So we'd like people to be able to practice the skills that they've learned outdoors.
Last year, lifeguards on our beaches helped more than 25,000 people. But distress in the water isn't perhaps as you'd expect.
We all kind of think that a drowning child is going to be someone splashing around and making a fuss, making some noise, but this wasn't. He was silent, wasn't even knee deep, it was just my calf deep. So he was submerged under very shallow water.
Nicola says more could be done to keep safety at the forefront of people's minds.
We have so many signs of the beach about littering. I think maybe a gentle reminder to parents, the sea is so dangerous. It's fun, but it's also really dangerous.
Sarah Farmer, BBC News.
A family in Warwickshire have had the surprise of their lives given a mission impossible when Coventry Airport closed. The actor Tom Cruise, filming in Birmingham, was forced to land his helicopter in Alison Webb's garden in a little village nearby. The family had only been told an unnamed VIP needed somewhere to land. Cruise posed for pictures and in gratitude gave a free helicopter ride to Ms Webb's children and her partner's children. Nice surprise. Now, time for a look at the weather. Here's Thomas. Hi there.
Hi there, Clive. We've entered a spell of settled weather, prolonged spell of settled weather, thanks to something called a blocking high, which is here for the next 7 to perhaps even 10 days. And one of the reasons why it's called a blocking high is because of the force or the wind that it exerts on weather fronts trying to come off the Atlantic, so they get stuck out in the North Atlantic and never come our way, and it stays dry and settled. And that's going to be around for the next about 10 days or so. And often we have morning mist, fog in places, bright enough afternoons and some warm sunshine as well. Now let's have a look at that sunshine in the satellite picture, and you can see a lot of variable cloud across the UK. Now Scotland, the north of England and Northern Ireland are in the very centre of that high pressure, so some beautiful weather there around the Western Isles. But then we also have this bank of cloud which drifted off the North Sea, carried on a breeze last night, and you can see it's fairly overcast across parts of the Midlands into areas of Yorkshire as well. And then the south is sunny again. So the temperatures really depend on how much sunshine you're going to get. And the cloud amount's actually one of the most difficult things to forecast. It's something that the apps will certainly struggle with. They'll sort of chop and change from cloudy to sunny back to cloudy again as these areas of cloud sort of drift around this area of high pressure. So it's certainly not a uniform area of weather. Some of us will have clear blue skies, maybe just wisps of fair weather cloud. Others will be stuck underneath the cloud. And in fact, tomorrow you can see again more cloud across the south of the country, whereas in Glasgow, where we have those prolonged sunny spells, temperatures could actually hit 26 degrees Celsius. Now, a subtle change in this high pressure as we head towards Thursday. A weak weather front, a cool front, drifts in from the north. That's going to introduce thicker cloud for a time and also more of a breeze along these North Sea coasts. So the temperatures will dip a little bit here, say around 16 degrees, whereas further westwards in the middle of that high, the winds are lighter, there's more sunshine, so temperatures will get into the low 20s. And the same pattern continues into Friday as well. Remember, it's the cloud amount. So for some of us, one day will be sunny, the next day will be bright, and the day after cloudy again, and then it's back to sunshine. That's literally the summary for the next few days. So once again, our app's struggling a little bit with the amounts of sunshine, but the broad message is that for the next 10 days or so, there's not an awful lot of change across the UK overall. Back to you, Clive.
All right, Thomas, thank you for that. And a reminder of our top story. Pressure on America intensifies to keep troops in Afghanistan longer so more people can flee the country. There's also mounting evidence of Taliban atrocities.
We have also received credible reports of serious violation of international humanitarian law and human rights abuses.
That's it. So goodbye from me. Now on BBC One, let's join our news teams where you are. Have a very good afternoon.